Welcome back. I'm Barry Craig. Election day is fast approaching. Polls show in the governor's race, the Democrat, Steve Beshear, has a comfortable lead over Ernie Fletcher, the Republican incumbent. With me today are two of the college's resident political gurus to talk about this election, the governor's race as well as the other races that go along with it. They are Gerald Watkins, a professor of political science.
Good to be with you.
And Cale Sullivan, a student here on campus who has a passion for politics. Cale even watches Canadian parliamentary procedure on C-SPAN.
Rising star here. You're going to see him out running for public office one of these days.
Okay, the polls. The last one I looked at, and I think you all too, Beshear has a 15 to 20 percentage point lead. So is the only real question out there now, how big a blowout will it be?
I think you're right. I think it's not over, and of course, a day's like an eternity in elective politics. But at the same time, you expect these races to get closer together as you get closer to the date. And here we are, just a few days out, and he's maintaining his lead, 15 to 20 points. He's had a 20-point lead throughout this whole campaign, just about since the primary. And he's been hit as hard as Fletcher can hit him on the Kentucky Central Life Insurance issue, and he's pushed his platform as he's had plenty of money to spend and to get his message out. And so I just think that the indictments have taken their toll, that it's impossible to recover from that. And I think the issues favor the Democrats, and people basically want to change, and a lot of unrest among the voting electorate out there, and that favors the challenger. And so I think, and if there was any surprises out there, they would be out by now, I assume. So barring any incredible surprise, I think that you're going to see at least a 12 to 15 point margin on election night, which would be an incredible landslide for Kentucky, particularly in recent decades where it's been more two-party competitive.
Well, when I consider this governor's race, the Oliver Cromwell quote comes to mind, his speech to the Rump Parliament in England, about how Kentucky Republicans feel that Ernie Fletcher has stayed far too long for any good he may continue to do. Republicans are abandoning Fletcher in droves. Democrats are united behind their candidate, Steve Beshear, and I fully expect to see a record margin. It's not out of the question for there to be a record margin to break the record set by Wallace Wilkinson in 1987 against John Harper in that year's governor's race. And we could easily see a 200 to 300,000 vote margin for Steve Beshear on election night.
Now, by abandoning, do you mean they're going to vote Democratic, or they're just going to stay home?
According to the polls, most of the public polls, up 25 to 30% of Republicans are fully prepared right now to vote Democratic. Most of those, including, this goes back to Ann Northup's challenge to Ernie Fletcher in the primary, and right now 51% of Northup voters are backing Steve Beshear.
And that, of course, would be...
That'd be fatal for a Republican.
I was going to say fatal for any candidate.
Yeah, because Kentucky is, well, we're, 57% registered Democratic. Mm-hmm. And about 39–40% Republican. So they've got to have their entire base plus a sizable Democratic vote, which they have been getting in some of these national races, but doesn't appear it's going to happen this time around at all. So Cal's right.
One thing I thought was interesting about the campaign is Fletcher just hitched his wagon to the gambling star. If you drive around the area and you look at the Fletcher signs, it's got gambling on there. Did that turn out to be a bad bet for the governor?
It certainly didn't work to his favor like he thought it would, and I did honestly think that he would make some traction with that issue, because if you look at the history of the effort to amend the state constitution to allow for casino gambling in Kentucky, for the last several sessions of the General Assembly, the gambling supporter, the industry, has not been able to find one single sponsor in the House or the Senate to introduce it. It would have to go as a referendum, go through the House and the Senate, and then on the ballot for an up or down vote by the electorate in the next general election. But you got to have a sponsor, or at least one in the House and one in the Senate, to introduce it, and they couldn't even find one sponsor. And the president of the Senate was opposed to it, and the House Speaker is opposed to it. So it looked like it might be possibly a winning issue, or at least to make some traction for Ernie Fletcher. But I think Steve Beshear, to his credit, masterfully handled his response to those accusations and those charges that he was trying to corrupt the economy and the moral fiber of the people of Kentucky by trying to introduce casino gambling. Steve Beshear just did an incredible job of allaying any fears that anyone might have of any negative effects from the possibility that might pass. So really, to tell you the truth, I don't think it's hurt Steve Beshear a bit, and it really obviously has not helped Ernie Fletcher. The people who were going to vote for him would have voted for him anyway. And so that kind of was a surprise for me, looking at the recent history of that effort. I thought it would potentially hurt Beshear, but it hasn't.
Well, one of the things that certainly hurt Fletcher in his crusade to make gambling the central issue in this year's governor's race has been the fact that up until 4 or 5 months ago, Fletcher had the same position that Beshear has right now, and that is to allow all Kentuckians a vote on whether or not to permit expanded gaming in Kentucky. Right now, when he realized that Beshear was going to be the Democratic nominee for governor, Fletcher went and changed his position on that issue and decided that he was going to be against gambling. I've seen the opinion polls. 88% of all Kentuckians favor a vote on expanded gaming, and only 12% do not want to vote. Mm-hmm. And basically what the Steve Beshear campaign has done is to frame it an issue to where you can either have a choice between deciding on the issue or letting one man decide on the fate of Kentucky's future.
Mm-hmm. Obviously, a central issue in this campaign is the indictments that have dogged Fletcher from the very beginning. What do you say to people who say, well, they're all corrupt? They've all got skeletons in their closet. We remember Paul Patton's peccadillos with a certain woman from a county to the west of us. That in other words, that Fletcher, he just got caught. People said the same thing about Nixon. How do you respond to that?
Well, I've heard that, but at the same time, I mean, you had the grand juries are not Democratic grand juries or Republican grand juries. It's just a sampling of the populace out there who hear the facts and look at the law, and so and they indicted 19 people, I believe it was. So if you're a diehard Fletcher supporter, you obviously want to try to dismiss that in your own mind and in your vocabulary with trying to persuade your friends to vote for him that, well, everybody's always done it, they just didn't get caught. Well, that's not exactly true. I mean, yeah, politics has played a role in time past as far as people getting jobs, but I mean, the law is the law, and you can't, for those positions that are civil service protected jobs, they're nonpartisan. They go by test scores, and so, and when you come out and just fire someone who's in a position because their party registration, so you can put someone else in, that's really not as I have seen it practiced in the past in Kentucky. So it's to me, I don't think you can really say, well, everybody's done it, he just got caught. I don't think everybody has done it. And so a lot of people, while the diehard supporters dismiss it with that, and I've heard that several times, but at the same time, for those a little more independent thinking, they look at that and they just say, hey, you know, this guy came in with the most incredible resume I've ever seen, that you'd think he was qualified to run for president, but apparently just didn't have the administrative experience and skills, and surrounded himself with some young, naive people who didn't have experience, and just as I've talked to several experienced Republican operatives that have been around the block a couple of times, and they expressed their disappointment that, you know, this should never have happened. And so I think it's really hurt, obviously, the governor, because it's hard to defeat an incumbent, and with a resume like Ernie Fletcher has, and he's telegenic, he's an excellent speaker, to, go from being a very popular congressman to people having all these high hopes as governor to the position he's in right now. I mean, people have just given up.
Well, in 2003, Ernie Fletcher, you mentioned Paul Patton's troubles, we should just say.
Peccadillos.
Yes.
It's a nice alliteration. Patton's peccadillos. I like alliterations.
Yes.
But go ahead.
Well, in 2003, Ernie Fletcher was elected. I think we all know it. He was elected because of the scandal-ridden Patton administration.
Oh, absolutely.
He ran on a promise to clean up Frankfort and to change the way that politics are done in our state's capital. And as Republicans and Democrats have seen, he has not done that. He managed to find himself indicted by a grand jury. Voters have a clear and very strong rejection of hypocrisy by their nations and by their state's leaders. And Fletcher certainly has
So you
not
think,
found him.
and that's an interesting point. So if Fletcher had said nothing about cleaning up any mess, would he be in better shape?
It still would have hurt him, but voters wouldn't be looking at the hypocrisy. He wouldn't be looking at 25% of his own party defecting to vote for a Democratic candidate for governor, something that if you had told me that 2 years ago, I would not have believed.
You know, President Calvin Coolidge, who does not rank high among presidents, said something, and I think that any Republican or Democrat could go along with it. It's this: you can't get in trouble for something you didn't say.
That's right.
And I think that's a
Old silent cow.
Yeah, and I think any Democrat or Republican could deal with that. And I think that you're right. I think that the Republicans were sitting pretty. I mean, this Patton scandal with Tina Connor was devastating.
Yeah.
Not just to him, but across the party. And here comes Fletcher portraying himself as this knight on a white horse, and he fell.
Yeah, and it would be like the Democrats saying about defending Patton. Well, everybody does it. Well, that's not true. I mean, when you get out there and if you break the law and you you bring about these things on you, then the press is going to go after you whether you're a Democrat or Republican, and the court, the jury, the court system, knows no party identification.
Mm-hmm.
But it goes back to that old adage: people in glass houses shouldn't throw stones.
Mm-hmm.
Which is basically the position that Fletcher left himself in 2003.
Mm-hmm. And it's not a matter of Democrats smearing a Republican. It's, look at Paul Patton. Look what he did to the Democratic Party. Mm-hmm. And, you can't defend the indefensible. And he really hurt the party in the next election cycle.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I know, Gerald, you've talked about in your class, that the winner in elections is usually the incumbent party. And again, in talking to students in my Kentucky history class, this election is historic in that here you have an incumbent governor being challenged from within the ranks of his own party. That doesn't happen very often.
Oh, it really does, and both parties, top to bottom, have a history of not defeating their incumbent elected official of their party. It just really doesn't happen. I can't think of a single time in presidential electoral history where the incumbent's party dumped them for a challenger. It just has not happened.
Well, even Teddy Roosevelt failed in 1912.
Yeah, that's right. And Reagan in '76 failed against
The
Ford.
closest it came was probably 1980 with Jimmy Carter and Teddy Kennedy.
Right. But close doesn't count.
Right.
Yeah, Carter wound up cleaning his plow on election day. So it just doesn't happen. So here you have a case where it's been since 1967 that you had a Republican elected governor.
Louis Nunn. Whose son, by the way, has endorsed Steve Beshear.
Yeah, that's right. And here the Republican Party has high hopes. They take control of the state Senate and pick up some House seats, and now they win the governor's mansion. And in less than 4 years, you've got two major challengers for the incumbent.
So would you then say that Ernie Fletcher is to the Republicans what Paul Patton was to the Democrats?
Very much so.
Yeah, I think it's had that effect on the party. So this election, if things pan out as the polls show, is really going to set the Republicans in Kentucky back several years.
And they had been making dramatic gains.
They really have.
And we've talked about this before. The first congressional district has been Republican for these many years. For a while there, the Jackson Purchase Republican domination in the state House. Of course, with Melvin Henley switching parties, that's changed that a bit. But the Republican Party had been gaining and gaining and gaining. So my question then to you all would be this. Well, when Abraham Lincoln was defeated for the Senate in Illinois, he said this is a slip, not a fall. In the case of Ernie Fletcher and the Republicans in Kentucky, is this a slip or is it a fall?
I think it's a slip. It depends on what the national parties do, but since the 60s, as we've talked about before, the South has been going Republican, and Kentucky culturally is Southern. And even as late as 1990, 70% of the registered voters in Kentucky were Democrats. And a few years ago, we were down to 57%. But as a result of what we've been talking about, for the first time in a number of years, those registered Democrat has outnumbered those registered as Republicans. So I think what it may wind up is make Kentucky, at least for the near-term future, a more competitive two-party state. Whereas we were leaning heavily Republican with 5 out of 6 House members, 2 senators, and a governor, all Republican, and control of the state Senate and picking up seats in the state House. So I think you may wind up having a two-party competitive state here for a period of years, but kind of depends on what the National Democratic Party does. If it moderates a little bit and winds up more competitive in the South, then you may see more Democrats elected in the South, like Kentucky.
It is definitely slipped. I'd say it's probably broken its ankle, but in this governor's election, as well as with all the statewide elections, it will give incredible encouragement to the state Democratic Party. But the dangerous thing for the Democrats to do right now is to be complacent with this. If they do not follow up on what should be a historic landslide win in this year's state constitutional office elections, then it will certainly become two-party competitive. It's already two-party competitive now, and it will be for the long-term future. And this is due to 2 things. One is the troubles of our embattled governor, and the second thing is the troubles of President George W. Bush. This does not create a climate that is conducive to electing Republicans by any means.
I think out of the 7 constitutional officers elected statewide in Kentucky this November 6th election, I think 5 of them will be Democrats and 2 of them will be Republicans. So what it looked like major gains being made by the Republicans in these statewide offices, it will be reversed. But I do expect them to pick up 2 seats, the Agriculture Commissioner and
Secretary of State.
Secretary of State. Yeah.
But now, of course, that commissioner election, it's one of those situations where this fellow, his name is David Williams, who had been a Republican, and he switched to the Democrats, and it's one of those things where I'm sure the Democrats are thinking, I wish this guy had stayed a Republican. He's kind of Cale, we were talking about one of his positions about he wants to revamp the Kentucky legislature.
Yes, that is one of his main goals while in office. He wants to abolish the Kentucky General Assembly, notwithstanding the fact that would conflict with the U.S. Constitution, which guarantees every state a Republican form of government. Now, Mitch McConnell probably disagree with the interpretation, but it guarantees every state a Republican form of government.
And he wants to replace them with county judges.
Wants to replace them. He's going to make the state Senate the 25 top county judge executives by population. The 25 most populous counties, their judge executives become senators. The 95 other counties, their county judges become the state house. So that way, all the state money can be returned back to the counties. Also, he has said that he wants everybody in Kentucky to watch the movie Patton, documenting the life and career of
General George Patton. That's right. That was also.
Well, as Barack Obama said last week, every family has its black sheep. So, of course, he was referring to someone else, but I think the Democratic Party in Kentucky certainly has its black sheep, and David Williams.
Well, and he was before. He was a Republican. He ran for governor, I believe, didn't he, as a Republican? And got about a 1/10 of 1% or something. But again, and I think that's been difficult for the Democrats to deal with this guy. I don't see him appearing at any of the big, party unity rallies.
Well, the fundraising report was released on October 12th.
Right.
Richie Farmer, the incumbent, raised roughly about $100,000. Maybe it's like 85. Maybe I believe he had 85 cash on hand. 85,000 had raised 120 spent roughly about 30 or 40. David Williams, on the other hand, the Democrat candidate, has raised $52.79. He has spent $52.79 for a net cash on hand of $0 and 0 cents.
Yeah.
Tell me.
And you know, here again, this is an example. I try to tell my students, Kentucky politics is every bit as entertaining as Wildcat basketball or Wildcat football this year. I mean, I'm not going to say only in Kentucky could this happen, but this fellow, and who knows what he'll run as next time. He's tried Republican, he's tried Democrat. Who knows what he'll be, a Whig maybe next time.
And another interesting thing with the Democrat candidate, David Williams, is you know, he's been indicted also. You know, this very much hits Democrats, you know, on corruption issue. If anybody was paying attention to this race, it certainly would, with the ag commissioner. David Williams has been indicted on charges of menacing, perhaps terroristic threatening due to some type of dispute he had with his niece. Something involving slapping the you-know-what out of her was what he said. And it's due to go on trial January the 12th. Frankly, I would consider it, you know, if gambling is passed in Kentucky, perhaps the casinos would be interested in taking an over-under bet on how long it'd be before David Williams would be impeached.
Well, I predict 9-1 for Richie Farmer.
And I get what's interesting about that is in our political system, you really can't stop someone from running as a Democrat, can you?
Well, in Mississippi, they had a situation with their ag commissioner. It was a 4-term ag commissioner, Democratic incumbent, and he was running for re-election because their elections are also in 2007.
Mm-hmm.
He was running for re-election this year. But the thing is, he endorsed George W. Bush for president in 2004. The state Democratic Party in Mississippi struck his name from the ballot and said that they would not allow for him to run as a Democratic candidate for re-election to a 5th term as ag commissioner. But I don't believe we have any type of mechanism for
Has
that.
that been challenged?
I would expect
I bet it would be.
Yeah,
yes.
I've heard of some
he is
situations.
challenging it in court, and I expect he will win out.
Now, of course, it's in the European Parliament system is totally different. I mean, the party can perfectly pull someone because, but that's an interesting situation in this country. As I said, and if you look at the state Democratic Party website, this David Williams' name is on there, but his picture's not. And again, in looking at these unity rallies around the state, I haven't seen him coming along on any of these, which is it's a funny situation. They're saying vote the straight Democratic ticket, but then you got this guy. You think there'll be some ticket splitting there?
I think so. Yeah, I think you'll see a couple of splits there. Trey Grayson is highly respected and a classy candidate for
But
Secretary
now
of
he
State.
is in a pretty tight race, is he not?
I haven't seen any polls on that race, but with it being a Democratic year, I suspect the Democratic candidate should be very competitive. But Trey won't win like he did last time. But I would think he would probably be the favored candidate. But it's a bad year for him. It's a bad year for Republicans.
So what about that, Cale?
Well, Trey only won by a razor-thin margin in 2003. I believe it's something like 52-48 against a former county commissioner from Jefferson, a guy by the name of Russ Maple. Mm-hmm. Now, because due to the troubles, you know, the problems that Governor Fletcher is having is plaguing every single Republican running for statewide office in Kentucky. You know,
just as the patent scandal hurt the Democrats when he ran, clearly.
Oh, yes, very much. And, you know, I would consider it a fair possibility that Hendrickson would win, despite the fact that Grayson has outraised him by about 12-1, I believe. And, you know, as far as the ag commissioner's race, no, I wouldn't say it'd be a 9-1 shot because I fully expect this David Williams to pull in excess of 35, probably even 40% of the vote.
Really?
I think so.
Oh,
Straight
well,
ticket
now
voting.
we've got him on there. We've got him on the
I can't
record
believe
here.
there's that many mindless Democrats in Kentucky.
We've
Hey,
got
how
him
you
on.
think
Now,
he
we
won
got
the
him on the
primary?
record. He said it. He said it. Okay, we'll see. Now that one I can remember.
He got 58% in the Democratic primary, bear in mind. I mean,
But now, most people didn't know anything about him, did they?
No, and they still don't.
And they still don't.
As a matter of fact, the reason why he won the Democratic primary was just because it was actually kind of sad for Democrats because people actually went and got his name confused because he also has the same name as the Republican State Senate President.
Leader, yeah. And didn't David Williams, the Republican, say it?
Yes, at Fancy Farm, he went out there, and the first thing he did, he went out at Fancy Farm because he was the MC of that event and thanked Democrats for nominating him for Ag Commissioner.
That's a funny thing about
I think some members of the state Democratic Party perhaps wish they had nominated the real David Williams, we will say,
yeah,
more or less, for Ag Commissioner.
Yeah. So again, and to summarize this, if it's the larger the Beshear win, if it is indeed a Beshear win, that's going to put real pressure on these down ticket.
Yeah, there's
folks.
always, I think there'll be a coattail effect in this election for sure. The issues, again, all favor the Democrats, and since last year was this year, and next year probably will be, it's the Democrats to lose, really. And I think you'll see a coattail effect from top to bottom. The top candidates are classy and just really generating a lot of enthusiasm, huge crowds, a lot of support, and there will be. It probably won't be that high. We've gone from 60% straight party voting in 1960 to 24% in 1994 to, I don't know what it is today, but probably less than that. So, but there will be some effect that could, in a close election, carry the Democratic candidate over. I would be surprised if Trey Grayson loses, but it would be those coattail effects if he does, because he's clearly, I think, the better candidate.
Yes, and one of the problems that Trey Grayson has is, if you remember back about a year ago, he was flirting with the idea of possibly doing a primary challenge to the current governor.
Yes, he was.
He was very interested in doing that and ultimately decided against that for his political benefit. But, a lot of Fletcher Republicans, we will say, they are not happy with Trey Grayson. They would be perfectly fine if he were to lose. There's a state of civil war right now in the Kentucky Republican Party, and Democrats are going to use that to their own electoral benefit.
And that used to be the Democrats who feuded. You go back years ago with Happy Chandler Democrats and Burt Combs Democrats and Albert Barker Democrats, Ruby Laffoon Democrats, Tom Ray Democrats, and the Democratic Party, say what you will, seems to be very united this time.
Yeah.
And it's the Republicans who are sort of a role reversal. They're fighting among themselves.
But the Democrats have their fight. At least they've learned to wait till after the election, whereas the Republicans are doing it during the election.
We have less than a minute left. As before we went on the program began, you mentioned the possibility of McConnell in his election for the Senate, Mitch McConnell next year, that perhaps Larry Forgy will run as an independent.
Yes, U.S. Senator Mitch McConnell, he's the Republican leader in the United States Senate.
And who is basically the architect of the Republican Renaissance in Kentucky.
Exactly. He is the kingfish of Kentucky Republican politics, to compare him to Huey Long in Louisiana. But many fans of our current governor, Governor Ernie Fletcher, they feel betrayed by Mitch McConnell. They believe that Mitch McConnell put up former U.S. Congresswoman Ann Northup to challenge him in a Republican primary, and now most of those voters are going to Beshear. They feel like McConnell basically went and put out a mob hit, if you will, on the current governor and ruined his electoral chances. And the Fletcher Republicans, they do not feel that they will not go idly into the night, shall we say.
We've got to go idly into the night. We're out of time. I'm Barry Craig. My guests today were Cale Sullivan and Gerald Watkins, talking politics. We'll see you next time.